We go. Hey, we're holding at the end of chapter 7. It's at the period. It's about 15 or 20 lines from the end of the chapter, maybe a little more. If you look in the Chitas, it's for the 10th of Teves, for a leap year. In this chapter, the Alter Rebbe, like we say hopefully about every chapter, is addressing a foundational point of Chassidus, which is that God exists in all matter. It's not even to say it perhaps in a more profound way. God exists, and then matter is overlaid on the infinity of Hashem. So it's not that the desk exists and God is found within the desk. It's that God exists, and the desk, the way it's presented to us, is overlaid on that godliness. And we have the opportunity, whenever we interface with the physical matter, to either highlight that godliness or, God forbid, to plunge it deeper into the overlay of the physical characteristic that is on top of it. So every interaction is either an opportunity to highlight the godliness or to further plunge it into a deeper gullus, a deeper klipa, under the authority of the physical character trait. So, in a certain ironic sense, if you have an actual mitzvah action, so eating matzah, so that it's, I don't want to say it's not a competition, so it's not less important or more important, but eating the matzah only exists to be used for a mitzvah. Meaning the concept of matzah, of course, could exist independent of uh, of the mitzvah of matzah. It's still a food that somebody could eat because they just like eating it. However, it's more obviously aligned with its godliness. But when I eat an apple, so an apple I could eat simply because I'm hungry, in which case I am not accessing its godliness directly, unless I consciously make the point of seeing it as an opportunity for the fulfillment of or the highlighting of the godliness that is within it. So it is the intent that changes the experience. Now, of course, this is within the realm of that which is kosher or permitted or released, the more literal translation, meaning we are told that its godliness is accessible in the manner of direct interaction. So um, I can interact with the physical object and I can highlight its godliness, or I can interact with the physical object and I can only be highlighting its physical character. So making the bracha is one step, but then every moment that I'm eating this apple, because I made the bracha a minute ago, am I highlighting its godliness or am I highlighting only its physical character trait? And in that case, I'm burying its godliness. It is the godliness that is the missed opportunity to have been highlighted, which again, instead becomes further entrenched in the physical world, rather than being exorcised to become more identified as godly. Okay, so then the Alter Rebbe said, but what about if a person engages in a prohibited behavior? Now, one of the nuances that Hasidus introduces here is that when we are told that something is prohibited, so sometimes we have a rational explanation why something is prohibited. So stealing is prohibited because it's depriving somebody of their honest labor. I don't like being stolen from. All the different explanations we can come up for the mishpatim as to why these items are or these behaviors are prohibited to be done. But what about in the area of chukim, of those laws which defy any rational explanation? So I'm allowed to eat meat and I'm allowed to eat milk. But if I put meat and milk together, I'm suddenly not allowed to eat it. Why not? So we explain because for whatever reason, which we're not always given insight to, when the meat is put together with the milk, now the godliness in that meat and the godliness in that milk becomes trapped and cannot be exorcised from within it. So whereas when I encounter an apple, if I only see it as an apple, then you're right. I'm really no different than an animal who also sees it only as an apple. Whereas when I see it as something godly, then I am highlighting its godliness because that's its nature. Its character is that its godliness is mutter. it is unbounded, it is unrestrained, and therefore it's eligible. So when something is kosher, that doesn't mean it's appropriate, it just means it is eligible to be elevated. But if I am indulgent with kosher food, I have not elevated it. I may have further plunged it into its klipa. Now, again, as we use the analogy, this can happen with other people. Do I see another person only as they serve me? Or do I see the other person as the person themselves? If I see them only as they serve me, I'm not really seeing them. I'm not highlighting their character. I'm only highlighting my own character. And this person serves me. They make my life better. Or if I see them as as the godliness that is within them, or in their own, if you use a more secular term, their own character, now I'm elevating their identity as opposed to squashing and cluttering their identity. I elevate versus squashing. Now, what happens if a person violates and they engage in an asur, a trapped, a chained behavior, where its godliness is not accessible to to us in the standard direct manner? What happens then? How do I ever extract that godliness from where it was buried? So our answer is you can't do it, but you can. Why? Because you are able to do such an intense level of tshuva that you are able to find that godliness that's deep within it. That is, as an example, when a person builds a sukkah or bakes matzahs, we don't call that a mitzvah, and therefore there's no bracha made on building the sukkah. Why? Because the mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. The mitzvah isn't to bake the matzahs. The mitzvah is to eat the matzahs. So the preparatory step of building the sukkah and baking the matzahs becomes the mechanism through which we are able to sit in the sukkah and eat the matzah. In a somewhat similar fashion, when a person does an avera, so now they've engaged in some behavior that's godliness, cannot be exercised. So the person says, I'm going to eat non-kosher food. Or they did it by accident. They thought it was kosher. It had 27 hechshers on it. They didn't do anything, quote unquote, wrong. But it wasn't kosher. That's the fact. So you can follow the instructions, and if it's not right, it's not right. And you don't get to say, well, you told me. Okay, I'm sorry. So the person eats the non-kosher food. And they go and use the energy, because they do get nutrients out of the non-kosher food, to do mitzvahs. The fact is that that's the character of that entity's godliness, is that it is asur, it is chained, it is trapped, it is not accessible. However, if the person does such an intense level of tshuva, because nothing can withstand this level of godliness, that is, there's always godliness there. So there's no such thing as I can never, ever extract that godliness. It's a hard thing. We've talked about examples like that. It's a very difficult thing. And you think about that in an interpersonal. Can somebody do such a horrible wrong and still eventually do such a degree of tshuva that you can accept their alignment with you once again? It's a high level. It's a high level to be able to accept that level of tshuva. A person might say, that's it, I can't ever revisit this person. But conceptually, nothing can withstand the entirety of tshuva. There's no such thing as that you can never do tshuva, because the godliness is there. It's just deeply, deeply trapped under layers and layers of klipa. But if the tshuva is done with such intensity, so even in Talmudic terms, so it's not only concept associated with the, quote, mystical, but even the halachic term, we say zdainos, which means the deliberate sins, become zachiyos, mechanisms through which we become aligned with Hashem. Not just, okay, I forgive you, okay, I won't bring it up again, okay, bygones be bygones. It can become something far greater, that it becomes the alignment, a mechanism of alignment with the infinity of Hashem. How is that possible? How is eating shellfish or meat and milk or anything else become? Because deep, deep within, there's always going to be a level of godliness. Now, why don't we then go and do it? So we'll do such an intense level of tshuva. So we are told, A, we likely won't do it because it's such a deep level of tshuva. And unfortunately, people make these kind of deals with themselves. Whatever it is, I'll overspend this week, and I promise next week I'll feel so badly about it that I won't overspend again. Or I'll eat this, and then it'll make me, have such heartburn I'll never want to eat it again, or whatever it may be. So we think that we can play these games with ourselves, but rather, what commonly will happen is that we'll develop a tolerance for it. So we're warned not to do it. But if they did it already, it's happened already. So now, is there a repair? And the answer is ultimately yes. But it requires such an intense level of tshuva that's almost unimaginable. Now, it is true that you can find statements in the Talmud and so on that seem to suggest that some behaviors are unrecoverable from. There's no way you can ever fix them. It does seem to be certain character traits like that. It appears that way. And yet we say, even those, if you push and push and push, you can eventually find the godliness that's within them. The fifth Rebbe was wont to say, what a rachmanis, what a compassion we have to have on somebody that Torah says we shouldn't have any compassion on this person. So again, yes, you can never do tshuva, never standard tshuva, never regular, but dig and keep and persist and persist and persist. Not just being a nag, forgive me, but to genuinely find that level deep within you, it can in fact. Now here in the final section of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe addresses a circumstance that seems to suggest that this is irrevocable. And yet a person does such a violation that it can't be ever cured. So here we go. However, what about the life energy that a person puts into a waste of expression of seed? So now again, he has completely aligned himself exclusively and purely with his animalistic impulses. And therefore, he's totally aligned himself only with shalosh klipas tmeyas lagamre. Sorry. And again, as we discussed, the three stages or the three ply or the three degrees of corrosion of klipa that block the godliness from ever being expressed. Even that, its godliness can be rescued when the person does proper tshuva. Now, when we talk about tshuva, and as you recall, there is a section which we'll get to, Mitzvah Hashem, in the Tanya, that is 12 letters from the Alter Rebbe about the concept of tshuva as explained in Chassidus. And obviously it's 12 separate letters, which is more than we have time to summarize in the moment. But there, the Alter Rebbe adds, because certainly there's much in the halachic realm about tshuva, but there the Alter Rebbe adds that the concept of tshuva is realigning myself with Hashem. So you may recall this from the last times we did it. If we think about Hashem's name being written vertically instead of right to left, so the final letter Hey, Yud, Hey, Vav, and the final letter Hey, which is the part of godliness that has been entrusted to us, has gone off somewhere. It's not in alignment. So here is Hashem looking for this alignment, and here we are way off in some other place. And now when we do tshuva, we come into alignment. We come into this a smooth connection with the infinity of Hashem. So yes, there is the halachic parameters of tshuva, which include the things like remorse, and there has to be confession. We have to say what we did, because if we're not willing to articulate it, then we can always sort of skirt the issue. Well, I didn't really do that. and so on. And then there has to be resolve that we're actually never going to do it again. And there has to be behavior consistent with that. This way. Here we go. Okay. So that's more than just halachic ramifications of tshuva. Uvakavana atzuma, and with great intense alignment. Now, again, the word kavana, we recognize it's a pretty standard word. It means commitment or awareness or devotion, something in that line. You know, we talk about when you daven, you should have a lot of kavana. But what do we mean when we say kavana? The word kavana literally means, again, to align two things, to be mechavein, to align two things. It is the behavior and it is the commitment. So the behavior here is that we change our practices. The alignment is that we become so committed and so connected to the infinity of Hashem. And when specifically, B'Kriya Shema Sh'al Hamita, specifically at the bedtime, the bedtime Shema. Now, what is the significance of the bedtime Shema? In the laws of Shema, and this is for men, not women, because it's a time-oriented mitzvah, there is an obligation to recite the Shema when you rise up and when you lie down. That is the morning Shema and the evening Shema. The bedtime Shema is not just a recitation of the Shema, the 3 paragraphs. It is an entire service itself. And much of it is a reflection on the day, a extension of forgiveness for anyone who may have harmed me, so that when I go to sleep at night, I don't take with me any resentment against somebody who may have wronged me. And a similar confessional request that as I, lay my head down to sleep and I return my neshama on high at the end of the day, that any dings and nicks in the rental car should be overlooked by the authorities. So it is a combination of my forgiveness of others and the request that I be forgiven for any of my misdeeds as well. So there's something particularly special about the bedtime Shema, in a sense, precisely because it is not in the mitzvah realm of the Shema. The mitzvah of Shema is fulfilled in the morning davening Shachris and the evening davening Ma'ariv. This Shema is something more than just the halachic requirement to recite the Shema. So it's at that moment when I'm at the edge, which represents the bedtime, representing the bridge between the conscious state and the sleep state, the sort of physical primary awareness of awakeness and the spiritual primary awareness of shluf, that I am able to extend or to access or to connect with a level of godliness that is outside of this physical existence and parameter. It's like we say, like it says in the Gemara, whoever reads the Shema at bedtime, that is literally at his bed, it's as if he is holding a two-sided sword, 2 points on his sword. One is to slaughter the physical side of it, that is, the physical behaviors that I did. So at the end of the day, when a person is tired, so they're less prone to go and misbehave because they'd rather go to sleep than eat another nacho. They are sort of aware of the eternal over the ephemeral. And shenasu levush lechayis shibetipas va'oila achayis be'en kiri yedechein. And therefore, they are able to access this level of godliness that is otherwise contained in something that does not present itself with any awareness of godliness at all. And therefore they can discover that godliness. So again, it is not just the verbiage of the bedtime Shema, but it's the experience of the Shema at bedtime. That is, it's the end of the day. So the person is, like we call it in English, dead tired. They're ready to completely separate themselves from the world. And it's in one of the illustrations of the weakness of man. I mean, the fact that we need to sleep illustrates our physical limitation. We describe Hashem, Hinu lo yinam v'lo yishain shomi Yisrael. Hashem doesn't sleep. So it's not just because, well, we're strong. The idea being that sleep is a representation of the temporal character of the physical. So when we become overtly aware of that passing stature of the physical, we become more aware of the eternal of the spiritual. It's kind of like the Sukkot message, what is eternal and what is transient. The Sukkah is forever, and the buildings, the World Trade Center is temporary. So what are our true eternal behaviors, and what are our more transient temporal behaviors? So here, when the person's at the bedtime Shema, they can overlook or look beyond, look beyond the physical, and they can discover the spiritual in a way that's a lot harder when they're fully engaged in the world and their senses are very heightened. And for this reason, so this idea of wasteful seed is not mentioned in Torah, in the laws of prohibited relationships, even though it's far harsher and it's far worse, because of how much it expresses of impurity and klipa, because it's absolute without purpose. It's taking this capacity for creating life and transforming it into something that is purely self-indulging. So in this sense, it creates this far harsher form of isolation and klipa and tuma. And again, we only have to look at the world around us today, where this is sadly a very common practice in the broader world. I mean, as we know, and this isolation and so on, that's coming as a result of this, and all of the negative character traits that are, and negative, not just character traits is the wrong word I'm looking for, just negative consequences that surround this whole isolationist, sit in your basement by yourself behavior. The difference being, should be a sasuris meisiv kayev chayis b'klipis tmeya b'yoser achen yochel als misham machayis b'tshuva. However, when a person actually engages in a prohibited relationship, so then they are literally engaging with another person and potentially creating a permanent consequence from this misbehavior. And that's why those prohibitions are mentioned explicitly in incest and other prohibitions, because they can result in an eternal consequence of this indulgence and this misbehavior. And here in the Haggah, the Alter Rebbe points out the sort of Kabbalistic idea. So just a reminder that these Haggahs, these notes, so like many things in parentheses, you could in a sense skip it and not lose the message of the chapter, but it's inserted here to give us a little bit more of an academic understanding of the spiritual, Kabbalistic, as we call it, underpinnings of the message being communicated. So here it says, what is the particular harshness of prohibited relationships? Because when a person engages in an actual prohibited relationship, then their behavior becomes implanted literally within the feminine characteristic. So obviously this is describing the physical act. Conceptually, though, it is also describing the spiritual dynamic. That nukva, which is the feminine, is that which is receptive and develops that which is invested by the masculine. So just like it is in the literal conception of a child, or as we use the a little bit more modest term, the man brings home the wheat and the woman turns the wheat into bread. So here there is an investment within a prohibited relationship. And now this whole procedure that is designed to create life has become manipulated to the point, though, that it is now invested within a new physical reality, meaning without the feminine, so it just goes to waste. Like wheat, without it being turned into bread, it goes into waste. Here also, without the expression, without the interaction, better, it just goes to waste. The klipa mekabelus v'keletas achayis ma'kedusha, from this klipa that now receives it and now captures it from kedusha. So when there's an actual relationship, so the violation or the indulgence has now not only involved another person, but it's now retained some permanence, particularly, of course, if it results in the conception of a child. However, when it's just waste, where there is no recipient, there is no feminine characteristic, it's not developed in the world. And rather, it just becomes a completely self-indulgent behavior without any sense of purpose or godliness at all. So again, if when I encounter an apple, I have the option to see it purely as an apple, but in that way, I'm no different than the animal who also sees it as an apple, or I can see it as kedusha, and then I can extract the kedusha from it, or like we talked about with people, do I see people purely as what they do for me, or do I see them as the people themselves, not just what they do for me? They enrich my life, they make it easier, they don't make it easier, they make it worse, whatever it is. Do I not see the person, or do I see their godliness, or I just see what they do for me? So in this context, it's purely about self-indulgence without any sense of purpose or meaning beyond it. So back in the text, Elim kein yasser tshuva mi avarabba, unless the person does such a level of tshuva from avarabba. Now, again, as we've talked about, and we don't really go into the details as to what, in fact, what does that tshuva look like? Where I say, I'm sorry 100 times, 200 times? What do we really mean when we describe tshuva that comes from ava, and now we're calling it avarabba? Kol kach, again, just to finish that idea, until their deliberate sins become opportunities for merit. But what does it mean to do tshuva from avarabba? So let's talk a little bit about this idea of tshuva. Remember, we said that tshuva is realigning myself with the infinity of Hashem. So, at the harshest level, we might say, how long I got to stand here? And, you're not going to yell at me. In fact, just as an example, if we did a word search about the concept of offerings, karbonos, sacrifices, as it's usually called, and throughout Tanakh, we probably would find more examples of Hashem reprimanding the people for their, quote, meaningless offerings than we would for Hashem asking for sacrifices. What happens? So a person says, okay, I did an Aveira, put it on my MasterCard. Okay, how long I got to stand here? And I did it. Okay, it's like I ran the stop sign. Okay, I understand. I got to pay a fine, $20, $50, $75, whatever it is, leave me alone. This certainly is not what we would call a tshuva from avarabba. And it may be that I'm so traumatized by the penalty that I'll never do it again. That is a value as well. I remember I made this mistake once, and the consequence was so harsh, even if it's not something so shallow like getting a ticket for going through a stop sign. But rather, I feel this great sense of void in my life because I didn't do a proper mitzvah, or I didn't do it properly, and so on, that I am so particular every single year. I'm never going to forget. I'm never going to make that mistake again. which is a more profound level of tshuva. And again, not just a pragmatic level of I don't want to get yelled at, so I'll do it. But what does it mean to do a tshuva from Ava Rabbah? So we explain, and again, these are ideas that you recognize. We've seen them all over Tanya over the course of the years. There is the level that comes from Yira. Yira means that I am fearful of being distanced from Hashem. And Ava means my passion that I want to be aligned with Hashem. What then is Ava Rabbah more than Ava? I mean, what's the biggest? What is the character trait that we are defining as Ava and Ava Rabbah, et cetera, et cetera? So in Chassidus, we explain that Ava is the desire to transcend myself, when it's not at all about me. So when I say that I love my children because of what they do for me, I'm not really saying that I love them. I'm saying I love what they do for me. The old joke about the guy who walks into the fish store and he says, "Give me that whitefish. I love whitefish." And of course, the whitefish says, "Well, you don't love whitefish. If you love whitefish, you leave me in the tank. You love yourself, right?" So Ava means the capacity to get beyond myself, that it's not at all about what it does for me, which is a very, very difficult level to achieve. Because again, we like to think of ourselves as being selfless and so forth. In reality, we often are more selfish. And again, I don't mean that in a crass, greedy manner, but just in any sense of that kind of alignment. Okay. Like it says in the Gemara, what is considered a sin that can never be rectified? This is a person who has a relationship with a prohibited partner, and then as a result, they have a child. Well, that child is there forever. Because then, and again, sorry doesn't mean the window's not broken. I mean, there's an impact that's been made. Even if he does the absolutely most intense level of tshuva, he cannot extract that chayas to kedusha. And again, it's unfair to the child, and why should he have to suffer, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, this is the consequence of this misbehavior. And again, well, we only have to look around the world to see a lot of oops. I mean, that's just what happened. It's a lot of oops out there from a world of people's, choices and so on. And again, this is a very extreme illustration. And one of the things that the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring to our attention, I believe, is that ultimately this is true of every action that we do. Everything that we do has an eternal consequence. When we access the godliness, we highlight its kedusha. When we don't access the godliness, we further repress its kedusha. We bury it deeper under the klipa. It has now been brought into this physical world. It's now become invested within this child, and that's an eternal consequence. And sadly, momentary behaviors have eternal consequences. Again, I guess I shouldn't say sadly, because on the upside, when you do something godly, you all know these stories. They feel a little contrived, but it is true, that to the whole world, you may just be one person, but to one person, you may just be the whole world. And the time that somebody helped somebody and they did one thing and they, et cetera, and it changed that person's life forever. Okay, we'll stop here.